And we're about to begin in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to this edition of the Committee on the Present Danger China's webinar series focused on unrestricted warfare of the kind the Chinese Communist Party has been waging against this country for decades. Now compounded by People's War, which was announced in May of 2019 against the United States, a whole of society war in which they seek nothing short of the destruction of this country. We're going to be, as we often do, broadening the lens a bit on the various ways in which the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, has been pursuing that particular goal. In this case, it's a geographic expansion, not just a substantive content expansion. The geographic part of this is an area of the world that has been mostly neglected by the rest of it, and that would be the Arctic and the increasingly important strategic implications of what the Chinese Communist Party is up to in the Arctic waters and under its ice cap, and quite possibly in the days to come on land adjacent to the Arctic and its ice. The reason this is at the forefront of our attention at the moment, frankly, has something to do with the rather profound debate that has been taking place in NATO and in the opinion pages of papers here in the United States and a lot of other elite circles especially, over President Donald J. Trump's position on Greenland. It's a position that has been evolving a bit. It has included some very dramatic statements about the importance of Greenland to the national security of the United States, part of his larger concerns about hemispheric security. He has also talked about, quite possibly, if some arrangement were not able to be achieved amicably with the Danes who colonized the place and the 50,000 or so people who inhabit Greenland, then quite possibly needing to have the United States military be involved in ensuring the security of Greenland. This is still very much in flux. There is talk of a framework agreement having been hammered out between the President and the NATO Secretary General. It is, at this moment, as far as I can tell, still unclear exactly what is in that framework agreement, or for that matter, what might have evolved in further conversations that have taken place subsequent to that meeting on the margins of the World Economic Forum. But what we're going to visit about today is, yes, Greenland and its importance, of course, but how it fits into the larger regional challenges that are now being made manifest by both this Chinese effort to operate in that region, to move through what Xi Jinping has called the Polar Silk Road, as well as to exploit the resources that are under the ice and to some extent on its surface to the benefit of China, obviously, as well as perhaps to the detriment of other nations, including ours. To add further urgency to this conversation, we have had in the past few days the Prime Minister of Canada engineer what has been described as a strategic partnership between our neighbor to the north and our mortal enemy, the Chinese Communist Party, to assess all of these various developments some quite potentially portentous at that. I couldn't be more pleased to have a first-class group of experts, both on the region and on grand strategy, to explore what is going on and what it might mean for all of us and for the security of the country we love. To kick things off, I'm very pleased that we have with us a friend and colleague, a longtime, I think founding, in fact, member of our Committee on the Present Danger, China. His name is J.R. Jeff Nyquist. He is, I think, internationally renowned for his strategic analysis and commentary. He has been blogging quite creatively at jrnyquist.blog. He is the author of The Origins of the Fourth World War and a very good friend and valued colleague. We couldn't be more pleased to have him kick off this conversation. He has been studying what's going on in the Arctic and working with the Mackenzie Institute in Canada, which has been doing the same, and we look forward to his comments. Jeff, thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I was in Canada last month in Toronto and speaking at the Royal Canadian Military Institute in Toronto. And the mood there was, when I was introduced as an American who is actually a friend of Canada. And this is a conservative group. A lot of the leaders in the Mackenzie Institute, it's a right-of-center think tank, and some are associated with the Conservative Party. So this gives you an idea. Canada is a place of its own. And when the president talked about making it the 51st state, when this kind of talk went on, it sent shockwaves through this country, which geographically, it's one of the larger countries in the world, but in population, it's not. It's, maybe 38, 39 million people, maybe a little bit bigger population than California. But it's a rather small place. And we think of them as Americans. They sound like us. They're very close to us, but we don't really understand how different their history is. Canada has got a kind of a situation where you've got, originally, it was French. It was conquered by the British. The Tories that lost the American Revolution, a lot of them ended up in Canada. So this is a place that has a history of being not, the War of 1812 was fought with Canada and Great Britain. It's not exactly always been our enemy, but we have the longest demilitarized border in history. It was after the War of 1812, this border was established as demilitarized. It has stayed demilitarized this whole time. Now we're reading headlines about Canada preparing to defend itself against the U.S., which is, you might think it sounds like madness, because you can't really take President Trump's statements about Greenland or Canada as threats to invade. Because, to be honest, this would be a violation of the Washington Treaty and other treaties. The president would be subject to impeachment. And I think enough Republican senators would go along with, in a trial with his guilt, that he'd be removed. I don't think the United States would be able to do such a thing. But in places like Canada, they feel small, they feel vulnerable, and the tariffs really damage their feelings towards Americans. I talk to Americans about this, and they see it as a kind of joke. Oh, it's kind of funny. To Canadians, it's not. They had their living threatened, their jobs. You think the Canadian dairy industry, and many of its industries, by the way, everything's more expensive where it is frozen much of the year, right? When you're up there, you're under different conditions. Everything costs a little more. How could they compete with us if they didn't have some tariffs on certain things? And of course, countries have a right to protect their agriculture because that is what they depend on for food. They're going to be dependent on us for food. They give us oil. All their oil pipelines come directly to us. The Canada Canadian-U.S. relationship, I think years ago they were our number one trading partner. I think they're number two. It's a very important country for us, Canada. And before the election in 2024, when I was at the Arctic Conference in Toronto, a lot of the conservatives there believed they were going to win the election in 2025 in Canada. They were all ahead in the polls. Trudeau was incredibly unpopular. And then after Trump's inauguration and these statements about Canada, it just flipped the script. The conservatives were unpopular. Everything conservative was contaminated because it was associated with this right-winger, President Trump in America. And lo and behold, the left won again. You had Carney come in there. And the context of this is when I was there, people were saying China's taken over this country. The Chinese have moved into Canada with their influence. I mean, you realize China in a very short period of time has gone from 30 million people to 38, 39 million, and half of the new population is Chinese immigrants, right? And you have 1997, you have the Sidewinder report in Canada. It's a joint study of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the CSIS, the Canadian CIA, and it was about how Canada was being infiltrated by Chinese organized crime, triads from Hong Kong in the mainland, that had signed treaties with the People's Liberation Army intelligence, Chinese mainland intelligence, state security intelligence. And the whole organization of the thing was to penetrate Canada financially, to use Canada as a highway into America's flank, and to capture its political institutions. And to do this, there was even a part in the report about laundering money through urban real estate in order to buy politicians and to get additional front companies. And we can see over the last 28 years, since that report came out, 27 years, we can see that it has played out that way. And the influence that China has, and basically Trump's rhetoric has played right into China's strategy in Canada. And now, with Carney going to Beijing and declaring a strategic partnership, which the Chinese and some of their media now referring to Canada as an ally, this is extremely dangerous because Mexico is not a friendly country. And Canada, this is a huge border we have with Canada. It's one of the longest borders in the world between two countries. It may be the longest border between two countries in the world. It's long. And to have to defend that border, there's one other feature that's rather interesting, and I discovered this recently. China is buying land on the Canada-U.S. border, and the Russians are buying abutting land on the other side of the border. And I believe it's for smuggling purposes. So if the southern border is closed off, you got the northern border. And as far as resources in the Arctic, look, Greenland is 1,700 miles away. Canada is 0 miles away. And Canada has got all that Arctic territory, and they're already part of NORAD. Our generals work together to defend North America against aerial threats. If we lose NORAD, if we lose Canada, if this sticks, we're in deep trouble strategically.
My apologies. Jeff Nyquist, thank you. You've set the predicate for the conversation, particularly about Canada, and we will be discussing it a bit further, I know, in the course of the program as well. We've talked more about Greenland as well. But thank you for teeing all this up. We have, as I mentioned, several contributors who, as is sometimes the case, couldn't be with us in person, but to whom we're very grateful for joining us through a videotape of an interview that I did with them earlier for our program Securing America on Real America's Voice. We have excerpted passages of the interviews that are directly relevant to this topic, and with their permission, we are going to play them in the course of the webinar today. First, we're going to go to Captain James Fennell, United States Navy retired. In his last duty station, at the end of a very distinguished career in naval intelligence, he was the chief of intelligence and information operations for the U.S. Pacific Fleet. He is arguably the single most astute military observer and analyst of what the Chinese Communist Party and its People's Liberation Army are doing. He has warned for a very long time about a decade of concern in which the fruits of an unprecedented buildup of military power, which I must note we have substantially helped underwrite, is reaching a point of both maturity and operational experience in which its use as a kinetic dimension to what has heretofore been a non-kinetic, though there have been some pretty murderous chemical warfare and biological warfare elements to it, to be sure, but non-explosive kinetic warfare against our country by the CCP. And we asked Captain Fennell, based on his expertise in the Pacific reaches of the Arctic especially, but his general strategic expertise as well, to talk to us a little bit about this new front in the unrestricted warfare against our country at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. Let's go to the video with Captain Fennell.
I think it's important for people to visualize that we have all, as Americans, grown up with this map in our head that we got in grade school and maybe high school up on the wall in your history and geography classes that shows basically North America and Europe and Eurasia, Russia. And it kind of separates in our minds the Far East military district of Russia or the old Soviet Union from Canada, United States, and North America. But we need to start thinking in terms of the globe. And when you think of a globe and the world as it actually is, everything comes to a single point in the North Pole. So reality is that the North Pole and that Arctic region inside the Arctic Circle, that actually is much closer, the Bering Sea is much closer to Canada and Greenland and America than we actually imagined. So when China a decade ago started sending military ships up through the Bering Sea into the Chukchi Sea of the Arctic, people didn't really pay attention or think it was important because, hey, that's all Russian territory and the Russians got that covered and they're never going to allow the Chinese to be involved. Well, China's made it very clear through several white papers that they're a near-Arctic state. They got membership on the Arctic Council as a near-Arctic state, and they've been trying to spread their influence. And with some of the estimations of the pack ice receding at different times of the year, we're now able to send ships across this, what they call the Northwest Passage, which is a passage that goes through essentially Canada and Greenland and can come down into the United States and Europe and bring goods. And so that's something that China's been actually sent a ship this year, and they're exploring that. So there's a monetary issue there. But most importantly, Greenland is important for our national security because China is now researching the undersea up there. So this last week, we saw a report that talked about Chinese research vessel, a deep sea research vessel, doing exploration of the Gakkel Ridge, which is the ridge between Greenland and Siberia, runs up from the GIUK Gap. And this ridge is like a volcanic island that's still underwater. And they're researching that. The Chinese are. They're claiming they're looking for hydrothermal vents and for some kind of nodules and things of that nature. But in reality, what they're doing is they're mapping the undersea of the Arctic so that their submarines, fast attack and ballistic missile submarines, their newest versions that they're in the process of building now, the Type 95 and Type 96, will be able to operate up there and put the United States at risk. And President Trump understands that, and that's why he's announced this Golden Dome. If you go to our Cold War experience with NORAD, the North American Air Defense Organization between Canada and the United States, we had a string of radars along the northern edge of Canada that looked north to see if the Soviets were going to fire missiles from their northern bases, their ballistic missile bases, at America. And that was an early warning detection system that we developed with the Canadians. Well, now, because of the new hypersonic missiles and other longer-range missiles, we need to be able to intercept and detect launches earlier than that. So Greenland becomes even more important because it extends that early warning network the whole length of Greenland. We could be ringing Greenland with more detection capabilities that are integrated with space, and then having weapon systems up there like directed energy weapons that can now take out Russian or Chinese ballistic missiles before they even get into the exoatmosphere. This is the advantage of why Greenland is so important and why the president, has been unyielding on the importance of us to be able to move there without being constrained by either the Danes, the Greenlanders, or having to be some kind of committee in NATO and the EU to approve a forced movement. This is really the issue that President Trump was concerned about, and Europeans ignored it, poo-pooed it. It wasn't covered in the American press. But the reality is, when we want to order the USS Abraham Lincoln Strike Group to the Gulf, the president didn't have to ask anyone. He is the commander-in-chief, and that ship started going at 30 to 35 knots on his order. Well, we want to have the same ability to order munitions and not troops so much, but the capability to be able to shoot down weapons that are coming to us, at us, from the Chinese or the Russians. And that's why it's important that we have sovereignty over the bases in Greenland, which it looks like that's going to be the deal, which will allow the president to be able to, at his direction and discretion, and for presidents in the future, to be able to move the required elements of a golden dome that will be able to shoot down, detect, and then shoot down incoming ballistic and hypersonic missiles that will vaporize millions of Americans. And that's why the Chinese and Russians are building them. They're building them for that purpose. And we sometimes forget that that's what they're intended to do. And we have to defend against that. And it's not irrational. And because they want to say, well, there's not a ship or a carrier 12 miles off of Greenland today, that there's no threat. This is faulty thinking. It doesn't have to be there this minute. It's the idea that it could be there in the near term. And if you look at the trend line of where Chinese naval operations and Russian naval operations are going, the Russians are still building new generation nuclear submarines. They haven't stopped. Ballistic missile submarines. So both nations understand the importance of this. That's their card in the game to threaten us and to get us to bend to their knee. They'll use that against us, and we have to be able to defend against it.
Amen, Captain. And as you know, they are actually exercising jointly, increasingly, strategic nuclear attacks against this country. So this is, as they say, no drill. Captain, let me ask you quickly in a minute or so that we have left. Talk about this deal between the Chinese Communist Party and Canada and its strategic implications, especially for us.
Well, it comes across to me as that basically Prime Minister Carney went over there and said, I'm going to help you rescue your energy deficiencies that you've just lost in Venezuela and potentially could lose in Iran. And we're going to help you with that, and we're going to sell you oil. And we'll sell you some canola oil as well. So it was basically Carney saying, I'm going to throw a lifeline to you because I have a globalist worldview that's more aligned with you than I am with President Trump and an America First nation-state approach to national security. And this is very alarming because they are part of NORAD. They are part of this whole Golden Dome initiative. So everything I just said could be potentially at risk. And when you throw in Starmer's actions over the Chagos-Diego Garcia issue, you start to really ask yourself, is it time to reassess the entire Five Eyes intelligence sharing agreement?
I think it is, especially with Australia being similarly in the left's hands, communists for that matter. Communists, indeed. Thank you so much, Captain Pinnell. This is, again, as is generally the case with his briefings, very important, framing of the issues, both with respect to the Arctic and the use being made of it by the Chinese at the moment, and introducing not only this question of how the president has been viewing and proceeding with respect to Greenland, but also this very, very ominous development of essentially the Chinese pulling one of our most important allies, and indeed our neighbor, into its maw as part of a new strategic partnership with China and Canada. We're going to take another live contributor to this program, which is greatly valued. Kenneth Abramowitz is another strategic analyst. His renown has been particularly great in terms of financial and healthcare related matters, but he's pretty impressive on the national security and homeland security grand strategy and its analysis as well. He is the founder of SaveTheWest.com and also the president of Citizens for National Security. And he's a great friend of ours, as well as a very active contributor to our program at Securing America. I'm deeply grateful to him for taking a few minutes to join us for this topic about the Arctic and hemispheric security and the CCP threat there too. Ken, welcome. Over to you.
Great to be with you. I'm freezing in Florida just thinking about the north and the big storm coming. And so let me just mention a few quick things. I'm going to put Canada, UK, and France together in a little circle. They're all what I would call pre-existential threats to America. I can't say they're existential threats today, but the seeds are there for all three of them to become existential threats. Yet I can't detect any strategy that America has to protect itself from these pre-existential threats or change the course of these three countries. These countries have been infected, so to speak, by what I've said before, the Reds, the Greens, and the Blues, the communists, Islamists, and globalists. And so, for example, Canada, we were just discussing how half of their immigration or so in the past 10 years came from the Chinese. I believe the other half came from the Muslim countries. So they've been invaded by both China and the Muslim Brotherhood through various Islamic migrations over the past 10 years. Now, Canada as well as France and England have open borders. So it's an open invitation for our enemies to invade us, just as we had open borders for 4 years. Now, what country has open borders? Basically, a country whose government's corrupt to the core and is getting money, either directly or indirectly, from our foreign enemies, because it's our foreign enemies that want democracies to have open borders. It's not in the interests of any country to have open borders, but it's in the interests of our enemies. So Canada, France, England have been invaded for, I don't know, 20 years, let's just say, probably more, but let's just say 20 years, as was America. The difference is, under President Trump, we now have closed borders, and we have moved to deport bad guys. I believe 2.5 million of the 20 million illegals during the Biden administration have self-deported, and we've deported and seem capable of deporting about 500,000 a year. But if we maintain that pace, that's let's just round it off to 5 million. It's 5 million out of 20 million. We still have a long way to go. And the Trump administration has not started to deport Islamists or Chinese yet. They're just deporting criminals. Now, we should say to the Canadians and the Brits and the French that we closed our borders, we expect you to close your borders. And number two, we're deporting bad guys, and we expect you to deport bad guys. That would be at least start the discussions rolling, that these three countries have to protect themselves from outside enemies and remove the internal enemies that they've allowed into their country. So we should be having more discussions and then eventually pressure, because for different reasons. Canada, because they're on our border. So these bad guys, they're not going to stay in Canada. They're coming down for us. And so one of the challenges you have, this was alluded to in a previous discussion here, is that if we put pressure on them in the wrong way, the delusional population in the criminal fake media in those countries will convince the people that America's not acting in their interests and that they should unify behind the leftist governments that they have to protect themselves from America. And that's sort of what happened in Canada. It's hard for an American to believe that, but when people have been subject to propaganda for so long, they can't think straight. And my final point that I'm getting to is eventually we have to publicly call for regime change in Canada, England, and France. England and France are different. They're further away, obviously, but they have nuclear weapons. And if they become Muslim countries, we can't sit back and allow that to happen. In Canada, if they become a Chinese colony and a Muslim colony at the same time, that's another existential threat. So in any case, Greenland is in the middle, and this adds an extra dimension to why we have to have Greenland to protect ourselves from these pre-enemies who in time can become real enemies. So that's my quick update of the situation.
Ken, thank you. Very bracing stuff. Regime change in 3 of our allied countries. I know you're not talking about the United States government going in and arranging that, but I think the idea that the track that each of those countries is on is not only obviously of mortal peril to the people of those countries and their future prospects, but also to our vital security interests as well. So we appreciate, as always, your offering some powerful food for thought, and we'll look forward to getting feedback from some of our other contributors to it. But before we do, we're going to hear from another of our pre-recorded pieces, also on Securing America earlier today, from Charles Sam Faddis. Sam is, as I think those of you who've been monitoring these webinars know, a very important member of our Committee on the Present Danger China, a very active contributor to these webinars and to Securing America. He brings to it the experience of 20 years undercover as a Central Intelligence Agency spy. Before that, he served in the uniform of the United States Army, and somewhere along the trail was an assistant attorney general out in Washington State. These days, he is doing continuing public service as the driving force behind an incredibly important online resource and magazine. And you can find it at andmagazine.substack.com, and I strongly encourage you to do so. We asked Sam to weigh in on these issues of the northern reaches of our hemispheric security interests, and he has, as always, some very important insights as well. Let's go to the video with Sam Faddis, please.
Well, I mean, there are all sorts of dimensions here. One of them is obviously straight up defense in the sense of missile defense and these kinds of things. which, once upon a time, decades ago, Frank, we used to take that actually as, I thought we just accepted that. We understood that. The whole idea of needing to have radar warning stations and all of this kind of junk. I don't know why we suddenly decided, even as the threats multiplied, that that's not important. That obviously is huge. Then there's a whole separate geopolitical dimension here with rare earth minerals and other natural resources. And the Chinese are not an Arctic power, but they've declared themselves, what is their terminology, a near Arctic power or something to that extent. So they have just declared that they somehow have an interest and a claim they are completely contrary to all international law. And look, we've neglected this for a long time. I think we have one heavy icebreaker left that the U.S. government owns, and the thing is like 50 years old. And we've had to contract to buy icebreakers from abroad now because we can't make them. I mean, this is yet another area in which we've ignored the threat for a really, really long time. Look, takes us into the realm of geopolitical things that I think Trump absolutely rightly is focused on, that have been neglected for a really, really long time. If you want to have a robust American economy and for us to really remain the leading economic power of the world, well, you ought to be focused on the fact that we rely on the Chinese more or less exclusively for rare earth minerals, and our entire economy by this point is built on rare earth minerals. That's kind of a bad thing. So these are of the highest order in terms of geopolitical things that we need to be focused on going forward. At this point, Frank, I wouldn't be surprised to find out that we just go directly to the fact that the Chinese have a military presence on Canadian soil. I mean, not to be overly dramatic, but I think Canada right at this moment is lost. I mean, the united front efforts that you and I are always talking about inside the United States and the compromise of our political system down to the state and local level. As bad as that is in the United States, we both know it is so much more advanced in Canada. At this point, the fifth column is in control. So, no, it would not surprise me. And it's a massive, massive security issue. And the Canadians don't seem to be particularly shy at this point about publicly confronting us over this. They don't even seem to feel the necessity to sort of crawl around in the shadows and pretend like they're still on our side. That really is very troubling.
Would you be surprised if, particularly as a result of this new deal between Canada and China, that the Chinese actually secure access to parts of the territory of Canada and open up some kind of commercial operation, but in practice one that is a foundation for a military presence as well?
At this point, Frank, I wouldn't be surprised to find out that we just go directly to the fact that the Chinese have a military presence on Canadian soil. I mean, not to be overly dramatic, but I think Canada right at this moment is lost. I mean, the united front efforts that you and I are always talking about inside the United States and the compromise of our political system down to the state and local level. As bad as that is in the United States, we both know it is so much more advanced in Canada. At this point, the fifth column is in control. So, no, it would not surprise me. And it's a massive, massive security issue. And the Canadians don't seem to be particularly shy at this point about publicly confronting us over this. They don't even seem to feel the necessity to sort of crawl around in the shadows and pretend like they're still on our side. That really is very troubling.
Sam, speaking of this penetration, our friend Jeff Nyquist was one of those who was, I gather, given access to a report by Canadian intelligence. I think it was written over a decade ago, maybe even longer, called the Sidewinder Report.
I'm familiar with the report that you're talking about. What the report said is the Chinese are systematically interfering in the political system of Canada, compromising people, and down to the level of getting candidates elected to Parliament that are their people. systematically across the entire country, they are taking control of Canada. And yes, it came out many years ago, and nobody has done anything meaningful about it. So that is a sustained effort. It means every assumption on which we're building all of these defense aspects that you just talked about, well, they're all wrong. They're all gone. You don't have an ally to the north. You don't have access to this. And actually, your mortal enemy does have access to that and controls them. That resets the board entirely, doesn't it? So, and while the Canadians haven't done anything, we haven't done anything meaningful either about it. So it is not a small thing. It is not an incidental thing. And this is now the ultimate form of homeland defense. We're talking, our longest continuous land border, right? This is right here, right now. Not one day, like on the other side of that line right there, will be the allies of the Chinese communists.
Chilling thoughts. And I particularly appreciate this point about the Sidewinder report. And Jeff, I know you've been studying this, and we're going to come back to you to talk a little bit more about it in a moment. But before we do, I wanted to go to Brian Kennedy, the chairman of our Committee on the Present Danger of China, former president of the Claremont Institute, currently the president of the American Strategy Group. I call him President Kennedy for obvious reasons. He is the author, among other works, of Communist China's War Inside America, another aspect of the unrestricted warfare that we've been witnessing. But we're looking a little bit further north at the moment, and Brian Kennedy, we're always delighted to have you with us, another great strategic thinker and a man whose insights into this particular set of challenges from the CCP, and by the way, the Russians as well, as Sam pointed out, I think, that warrants the kind of attention that the President of the United States is giving it, and I hope the kind of action that he is setting in motion now. To you, sir.
Well, thank you, Frank. This is among the most interesting webinars we've had. They're all interesting in their own way, but this one has an immediacy to it that I think is very important. I know the East Coast is about to get a lot of snow and ice over the next few days, and so I was reminded of the coldest time in my whole life. I live most of the time in Southern California, but almost 30 years ago, one of our colleagues, Bill Van Cleve, who was a professor at Southwest Missouri State University, brilliant nuclear strategist, among other things. He and I went to Alaska because we were we were intimate at the time with the missile defense discussions going on in Alaska. And he and I went, I think it was probably this time of year, of all times of year to go, to Prudhoe Bay, Alaska. And a few hours from there in Fort Greely, they were basing one of the missile defense sites in the United States. And we both stood on the Beaufort Sea up there. It had frozen over, and we had gotten a tour of a British petroleum facility and met with some of their key political people, and then later met with some of the other military folks in Alaska who were working on missile defense at the time. And the reason, of course, was because North Korea, at the behest of the Chinese and the Russians, were threatening the United States with attack by nuclear weapons, and were building nuclear weapons to reach Alaska and California, the west coast of the United States. And so missile defense became, obviously over 30 years ago, but 30 years ago especially, a very prominent discussion, because up in Alaska, they were providing top cover, as it were, for the United States. Not only could you attack Alaska, but you could attack the United States if we had lost Alaska. And so we've had an interest, this group of us who are now part of the Committee on the Present Danger of China, in how to think about the Arctic and how to think about how you defend the United States from nuclear ballistic missile attack. So this is an issue very near and dear to my heart. And Frank, you were part of teams that would go up to Alaska and brief legislators up there and citizens in Alaska about the need for national missile defense, not only in Alaska, but all around the country. And so we're reminded today that Alaska and the North are essential for our national defense. What seems obvious to me in this discussion, as we've been warning about for some time, is that we're in World War III. That's absolutely clear. It's not gone fully kinetic. We're at that point in the war where sides are still moving and shifting and finding out where one is strong and where one is weak. Right now, China and Russia are trying to find out where we're strong and where we're weak. They know we don't have a national missile defense. President Trump has committed us to building a Golden Dome, and they're still working on the architecture, but part of the discussion is where to base all the various components of it. So when President Trump looks at the world, he sees the war has already come to the United States. He sees we were attacked by COVID. President Trump knows what's going on in Canada. He knows what's going on with the Russians and their war in Ukraine. And so all the pieces are being moved around the table. And President Trump, over the last year, has been taking steps to make sure that the United States is defended in World War III. He's not going to call it that, but he's going to take the necessary steps. So he suggests that we look at Greenland for strategic reasons. He talks about Canada because he sees that they could be, and I agree with Sam Faddis, they are probably lost to the Chinese and the globalists and obviously left-wing forces, communist forces within Canada itself. The idea that Canada now has 25% of its population that's foreign-born, that the Chinese are highly influential there, that they have large Islamic population, that the people of Canada, however good they may be, are subjected to a left-wing government that is not friendly to either Canada itself or to the United States, causes President Trump great consternation. When he talks about Canada as the 51st state, this is not a throwaway line. He sees that we cannot have a country on our northern border that is not friendly to the United States. And when Carney goes and signs a strategic partnership with the communist Chinese, that is, I would say, an unacceptable act. And as I said on Steve Bannon's War Room last week, during the Cold War, we had plans in the Department of Defense for the invasion of Canada. So you can walk into the DOW today, and somewhere there will be plans for what to do to invade Canada. Why? Because during the Cold War, if the military had somehow lost Alaska and the Soviets had invaded Canada, we, the United States, would have to take it back. It would be unacceptable to have the Soviet Union owning or allied with or controlling Canada. And so it was a matter of not merely the Monroe Doctrine, but of national survival to have a country like Canada in the hands of an enemy nation. This is the kind of planning the United States properly does. Now we're in a position in Canada where they've signed a strategic partnership with China that puts on our northern border the communist Chinese. What would we do if they invited, as one of our speakers suggested, the Chinese military onto Canadian soil? Well, frankly, I would tell you that is completely unacceptable, and we would take action. We would not let that stand. The same way that if the Mexican government would sign a strategic partnership with communist China, we would also do something about that. We're not going to let an enemy nation be on our borders. And so today, the United States is preparing for how to deal with that. And I note, when we think of World War III, when America pushes on Russia's borders, Russia responds. Russia attacks Ukraine. And so we see the war playing out in Europe with Ukraine and Russia. The Russians will do the same by encouraging Venezuela to our south, or encouraging the Chinese with Canada to our north. Again, this is just the war playing out in various ways to see how things develop. China, the exact same way. The Chinese are very interested in taking back Taiwan. If they can tie us up in Canada, it'll make it that much more difficult for us to defend our friends in Taiwan. And if we did defend our friends in Taiwan, of course, it would be because it's in our interest to do so, and secondarily in the Taiwanese interest to do so. We have huge economic interests in Taiwan. And so these things are all being played out right now in real time. They go sort of just underneath the radar. I mean, the Chinese strategy is to fight this war as long as possible below the threshold of genuine kinetic engagements, where we're fighting directly with them. But they're going to put themselves in the best possible position to fight a war with the United States. If they want to take Taiwan, what better way than to tie us down on our northern border? And so right now, President Trump, I think, is making a series of very strategic moves to make sure that we have the best platforms for national missile defense. Greenland would be part of it. And so looking at how we view the Arctic, these are a series of steps that seem to me absolutely necessary for our national defense. We need the top cover of the Arctic. That's absolutely essential. It's not a nicety, it's a necessity. And so I believe over the next few weeks and months, we're going to see some development up in Canada, because we simply can't let stand this idea that a strategic partnership will exist between Canada and China. And you look at the, Jeff Nyquist quite rightly said, they're right on the border. There's no difference when they sign that strategic partnership. So anyway, this is a very interesting conversation, Frank, and I look forward to it. And I really do look forward for us developing over time. How do we best think about how to encourage the Trump administration to do the most realistic, aggressive things possible to make sure that we don't have a threat from the north and that the Western Hemisphere is secured? So thank you, Frank.
Well, Brian, this is why we pay you the big bucks, is you're thinking very much over the horizon at a problem that may well be headed our way very, very rapidly. And I know this will be informing the work of the Committee on the Present Danger going forward, as I hope it will inform our audience and the administration and those on the Hill as well. We're going to hear next from another of our distinguished members of the committee, Colonel Grant Newsham, United States Marine Corps, retired. Grant, as I'm fond of pointing out, though he really needs no introduction to this audience, he participates in most of these programs, to our everlasting gratitude. He served as well as a Foreign Service officer in our embassy in Tokyo, and has been in business over there in the Far East for many years, knows it very well, and from his vantage point in Japan has been monitoring closely developments on the mainland of China and in the littoral waters, and not so littoral waters, I guess, at this point. They're reaching farther and farther beyond the second island chain, as it's called. We also appreciate very much Grant's best-selling, reasonably new book entitled when China attacks, a warning to America. And we were able to get him on the show, Securing America, earlier this week, and we've asked for his permission to use an excerpt from his comments, which I found very, very important indeed. Let's go to the videotape now.
Well, Mr. Trump is right for the same reason that Abraham Lincoln, Secretary of State, was right about Greenland. It's strategic geography. Trump's a real estate man. He knows what matters is location, location, location. Greenland is sitting up north in a position to cover the North Atlantic trade routes between the U.S. and Europe. It sits astride what is going to be a principal route from Europe over to Asia as well. But also, if you think of it as a very useful platform from a military perspective, that it allows you, one, to defend yourself better. If you're going to have missile defenses, a lot of those missiles are going to be coming over Greenland. And if you can have your systems in place there, you're obviously better off. Additionally, you have the ability to offensively project power from there, and that puts your enemies on notice as well. But look at it from the defensive perspective. If you're an enemy and you can get the positioning on Greenland, well, it's a very short missile flight from Greenland. Surveillance opportunities, signals intelligence are immense if you're that close. Now, we know, for example, that Cuba's a problem, having the Chinese there in terms of what they can do to us, surveillance, sort of offensive weapons, platform for subversion as well, Venezuela as well. That's why it's so much concern to the administration. And you have Greenland potentially playing a similar role. And so it's just important terrain. And I mentioned Abraham Lincoln. Well, the Americans also tried to buy it in the early 1900s. Harry Truman's administration tried to buy it from the Danes as well. And other territory that the Danes did sell down in the Caribbean. So Mr. Trump saying we've got to have Greenland, there's some very good reasons for that. Just strategic geography is the main one. And you'll also notice that the fact that Mr. Trump said it got people's hair on fire. And that's really a standard reaction by the Europeans and many in the United States as well, simply because Trump said it. If you listen to what he said in Davos the other day in his speech, and you sort of waded through some of the extra stuff, you could see that he sounded like a businessman, negotiator, playing his hand to the max, making the maximalist demands. And then he backed off a little bit and said, well, we're not going to actually attack the place. But he was leaving the door open for a deal. And it's less than he was originally demanding. But you can see that the people on the other side have simply gone so insane, they don't hear what he's saying, they don't see what the opportunities are as well. And I think he was also rightly pointing out, and when he was making America's case in Davos, he's saying, look, we have given so much to Europe, to NATO over the years, and we've gotten nothing in return. One might argue nothing, but in terms of what we have contributed, we haven't gotten anywhere close to what we should get. And he's pointing that out as a reason why his position should prevail. And so he was making a strong case for why Greenland is important. It's essential to America's defense, but also hemispheric defense. And that includes Canada as well, and the Europeans as well. If they get in on it, well, America's going to be even more committed to NATO. And you had to sort of pay attention to what he was saying, but any sort of sentient person in Europe who was listening could say, okay, here's what he wants, here's the deal, and here's what we might get out of this, and here's what we have to do. You'll notice, of course, that while many Europeans in Europe have gone insane, including apparently even the Finns, which is a surprise, and some of the Swedes, but look at what America is doing with Poland right now. They are building up substantial sort of military bases in Poland, and the U.S. is going to occupy them, have troops there. And that one demonstrates an American commitment to Poland, which is part of NATO. But America does want the other countries to play their role, to pull their weight. And that's something that you're seeing Mr. Trump is insisting on implicitly and explicitly. And for any deal over Greenland, whatever it is, if the Europeans would just say, yeah, you're right, our defenses are pretty close to useless, but we're going to build them up as we need to do, as most Americans who are going to provide the the bodies to actually defend Europe want them to do, and say, let's get in on this together, and we'll look after Greenland sort of as a joint effort. But if the only reply to Mr. Trump saying America has to have Greenland, has to control it, if the only response to that is, oh, Trump is insane, he's a dictator, he's breaking alliances, if that's the best they can do, but sometimes you just almost say, well, we'll take the Poles and the rest of you, we love you, but you're on your own. And this is so, I would suggest as a final matter that the Europeans who have a sort of a position of sorts about Greenland, well, they ought to go and make it in those parts of America, like Youngstown, Ohio, Erie, Pennsylvania, the flyover country where the troops that are going to defend Europe are supposed to come from. Oh, and the final point I forgot to mention, which Mr. Trump also touched on, is that Europe is still buying energy from Russia. Russia is using that hard currency to fund their war in Ukraine. And the Europeans are telling us that we need to spend hundreds of $billions to defend Ukraine, risk American lives. And at the same time, Europe is funding that war, so we can do that. That's some deal. So the Europeans, trying to look at this a little bit objectively, but you can see I'm a little irked by it all. They need to grow up. And look at the Poles if they want an example of how you can actually behave responsibly and get along with the United States. But as long as this Trump derangement syndrome is so immense in Europe, we're going to be in for some difficult times. But you'll see, I think we'll work something out with Greenland that suits everybody's requirements. And as usual, the Europeans will be putting almost nothing into it.
We'll be watching that closely. Let me just ask you quickly, if I may, Colonel Newsham, because you are one of our most astute and real-time monitors of what the Chinese Communist Party is up to, particularly in the military arena, but more broadly, strategically as well. Caught people by surprise, I think a few years back now, if memory serves, when the Chinese announced that they were an Arctic power. I don't think anybody's under any illusion these days that they are projecting power into the Arctic North. I'd be interested in your thoughts on the deal that they've struck with the Canadians just in the past few days, but also, what that Northwest Passage is likely to turn into in terms of a base of operations, not just, submarines under the Arctic ice cap, but actually in the waters that are now increasingly open year-round, and what it might mean for, Chinese bases in the Arctic North as well.
I'll start with the Chinese first. And around 2018, they declared themselves to be a near-Arctic state. There's no such idea. There's nothing like that in international law or anywhere else. They just thought it up as an excuse to say why they are justified in getting up into the Arctic, that includes Greenland, have a presence, and eventually establish domination. And they follow a predictable pattern there. They raise the idea quietly in some obscure location in China, then do it again in some small seminar somewhere, then in a sort of a local newspaper, and then they start talking about it at these international forums. And then finally they just say, well, that's always been what we are. Get used to it. And they say it's absolutely predictable. But what you can see is how Chinese domination is going to play out. You just give them a military presence, a physical presence, or even start with a commercial presence. And eventually you will have Chinese presence and domination. And you'll see, so you have to look out 5-10 years and you will see where the Chinese are headed. But if you just look at it today and say, well, there's no Chinese here, there's nothing to worry about, well, you're going to get into a fix. As for Canada, I think Prime Minister Carney of Canada is just a better looking version of Klaus Schwab, the former head of the World Economic Forum. He has basically sold out Canada to China. He's, in exchange for some canola oil sales to China, he's given them their car industry. And there's more to it, I think, than meets the eye. This is not a reaction to Donald Trump just being such a vulgarian as these people claim he is. But rather, this is something they've had in store for a long time. And I think the Chinese governing system actually is something that a certain class of person in Canada thinks is a very good one. And if you look at how they behaved during the COVID lockdowns, and particularly to the trucker protests, Look at what the Canadian government did, and that is very close to what the Chinese Communist Party did. So when you look at Carney, think of Klaus Schwab, think of World Economic Forum and the Davos elite who think that they are entitled to govern and that they know better than everyone else. And it's all about control. At the end of the day, this is not a reaction to Trump or to anything the Americans have done.
Colonel Newsom, thank you. This is incredibly important. I confess that I was a little distracted by the idea that there could be anybody who would be less comely than Klaus Schwab, but Mark Carney is certainly equipped on that score, but very deficient, it would seem, on other fronts, including the national security implications for both his own country as well as ours of lashing up with the Chinese Communist Party, let alone quite possibly having its forces present in Canada. We're going to hear finally from another of our colleagues, another astute and very creative free-range mind, I think of him as. Rod Martin is his name. He is the chairman of our Institute for the American Future, which is one of the sponsors of this particular coalition, among others. He is a former policy advisor to then Governor of Arkansas, Mike Huckabee. He has also been present at the creation of the company called PayPal back in the day. He's been a very successful entrepreneur since, and has become, in addition to all of that, a very highly regarded pundit and essayist and commentator, notably on his platform rodmartin.org, and with a product that he makes available by subscription there called The Rod Martin Report. I commend it to all of you. We have a final clip from him from, again, another interview that we did earlier in the week with the great Rod Martin. Let's go to his video now.
First and foremost thing, of course, is that everybody's headline was, Donald Trump renounces the use of force against Greenland. And it's like, Donald Trump was never going to use force against Greenland. Have you people just not been around for the last 10 years? Do you not know how this man negotiates? You would think somebody would have noticed how these always play out. He swings for the fences. He gives these maximal goals. I wouldn't even necessarily call them demands in a lot of cases, and freaks everybody out, gets their attention on something they otherwise wouldn't pay attention to, and negotiates exactly the deal he intended to from the beginning. So we'll see what comes of that. A framework deal has been announced, but not with any significant detail yet. But it's very clear. Mark Rutte did a great job of pointing out. He's the Secretary General of NATO. He is like, look, the Americans are completely correct about the need for us to pay attention to Arctic security, which we are not doing. And so I thought it was very encouraging. Well, the first and foremost thing, of course, is that everybody's headline was, Donald Trump renounces the use of force against Greenland. And it's like, Donald Trump was never going to use force against Greenland. Have you people just not been around for the last 10 years? Do you not know how this man negotiates? You would think somebody would have noticed how these always play out. He swings for the fences. He gives these maximal goals. I wouldn't even necessarily call them demands in a lot of cases, and freaks everybody out, gets their attention on something they otherwise wouldn't pay attention to, and negotiates exactly the deal he intended to from the beginning. So we'll see what comes of that. A framework deal has been announced, but not with any significant detail yet. But it's very clear. Mark Rutte did a great job of pointing out. He's the Secretary General of NATO. He is like, look, the Americans are completely correct about the need for us to pay attention to Arctic security, which we are not doing. And so I thought it was very encouraging. At the end of the day, Trump is exactly right. The problem is that Denmark can't possibly defend this essential real estate. And Trump said something that nobody has really been pointing to in his speech. He said, look, you don't defend leases, you defend things you own. Well, everybody's like, oh, he's an aggressor. He's trying to take things. No, he's not thinking about the next 4 years. He's thinking about the next 40 years. When we see the British, we have a change of government there. Suddenly we've got Keir Starmer running the place, and he's ready to give our most important base in the Indian Ocean, Diego Garcia, indirectly to the Chinese. Just hand it to Mauritius, which is completely in China's orbit, and all of a sudden, what are we going to do? Because it's just a matter of time until we lose that, and we're going to have Chinese spying on it to a degree that we've never had to deal with before. And it's stupid. The Chagosians don't even want this deal. And Starmer is paying Maldives to take the islands, which is just absurd. So if that can happen now, what happens in 20 or 30 years if some of these NATO countries are suddenly Francistan and Germanistan and Denmarkistan, and we aren't friends, and there isn't a NATO, and Greenland becomes an actual flashpoint? None of that is okay. And Trump drew the picture out for them very clearly for anyone who had eyes to see.
Well, good on him. And let's hope that what comes out of it is, in fact, a satisfactory arrangement. But it sounded to me as though it was heading towards a lease of some kind, which may not be for the reasons that you've just mentioned. We'll be following it closely, as will you. And again, you had a terrific report on all of this at Rod Martin Reports. You can find it at rodmartin.org. So, Rod, please finish your thoughts about the rest of the speech and important points the president made in its course.
Well, those are the most important pieces, of course, but he went further. You know, the real issue we're seeing, and we're seeing it in the Middle East, of course, we're seeing it with more tightly integrating Japanese and South Korean shipbuilding into the U.S. industrial economy. We're seeing it with the uppowering of those two countries' militaries, but especially Japan's. We're seeing it with the largest ever arms deal for Taiwan. Everywhere you look, you see Trump obviously emphasizing American defense industry because we want more good jobs here. We want more manufacturing here. All of that is true, but that's not really the goal. And he laid it out clearly in Davos. We want you to be partners, not dependents. We want you to actually carry your weight and pay your fair share. We're talking about 31 other allies in NATO who collectively pay less than 30% of the bill for defending the alliance. It's just absurd. And when they tried to make some big show of force in solidarity with Denmark, they sent like 15 troops to Greenland for a couple days, flew them in business class, flew them out business class. It's a joke. It's like a Mad Magazine strip. It's ridiculous. So Trump is pushing them, and Ruta made a really good point. None of the things that are positive would be happening apart from Trump. They're now paying their 2% of GDP for defense. That's a good start. They're now all on board except Spain for 5%, which would dramatically increase the power of the alliance. And still America would be dominant. And this is the thing. The people who think Trump is trying to withdraw from the world are absolutely smoking crack. That's not what he's doing. He's making friendly countries stronger so that we're better together, and in the process, shifting responsibility for their regions partially back to them. It's a maturing process. It's good for them. It's good for us.
Amen. That's what we want, is the win-win, of course. This has been an extraordinary program. I would like to take the advantage of the fact that a couple of our live presenters are still with us to just do a quick round robin on the question that I think emerges for me out of all of this, and that is the United States clearly has vital interests in the Arctic and the northern reaches of this hemisphere below the Arctic Circle. The question, I guess, is though the present thrash about Greenland has brought this into pretty sharp relief and gotten a lot of elite circles engagement, how prepared are we to do much about any of this? We have certainly nuclear submarines that can be called upon to work the problem of the Chinese undersea operations there. But as one of our speakers mentioned, we may have one 50-year-old heavy icebreaker. Maybe that's an understatement, but probably sounds about right to me. But in terms of Arctic capabilities, military as well as commercial, are we in a position, and maybe I could go to you first, Jeff Nyquist, because I know you've been studying all this, are we in a position to defend our vital interests in that region, especially if the Canadians prove not to be on side?
No, we're not. I had a conversation with the recently stepped-down commander of NORAD and his deputy in September of 2024. I think they stepped down in August. And they basically said, 24 fighter interceptors and, what did he say, 40-something missile interceptors. We can't stop the Russian long-range cruise missiles launched from submarines. And we can't stop the hypersonic missiles that can be launched from Russian territory. They go down really low. There's no means to intercept them. So even if you had this Golden Dome thing, you couldn't intercept these things. And the problem is if you lose Canada, Greenland's not significant. You have to win Canada back, and in order to have defense. And really, Canada's our ally. We have the Washington Treaty. We have the NORAD. We have all kinds of agreements. We have agreements already for basing. We have a base in Greenland at Thule. We had, I think, 3-4 other bases that we could reopen. You have to be careful not to make arguments that alienate your allies, because that feeds right into your enemies. In Moscow, they were celebrating the breakup of NATO because of this spat over Greenland. And there's 5 points I'd like to make about Greenland. I paraphrase Henry Kissinger: Greenland, like a dagger, strategically important country, like a dagger aimed at the North Pole. The mineral rights there. When I was at the Arctic Conference, exploiting minerals in the Arctic is very expensive. And the reason that it's not done is that the infrastructure cost is too high. So that's a way distant future thing. Greenland is 1,700 miles away from the United States. Venezuela and Cuba's 90 miles away. If we're worried about intelligence gathering on us, we should invade Cuba, not Greenland. We should be threatening Cuba, by the way. Canada and the UK and France are not existential threats. See, this is the kind of talk, if I'm a European or Canadian listening to some of the remarks people have made, the hair is going to stand up at the back of my neck, and I'm going to get very angry hearing what I'm hearing. Because we're already describing these countries which are vital to our own security as enemies. If they become enemies, say goodbye to everything you know. You're not going to be living in the same country, and United States may not be defensible. Okay, so diplomacy here is our first line of defense, not doing some business strategy where you say, oh, I'm going to invade Germany and Britain, so give me what I want because I'm just going to exaggerate right? That's not how diplomacy works. And if anybody's talking about preemptive war or hinting at it against Canada, let me tell you, Bismarck, he was a genius. He said, never start a preemptive war. You'll be morally to blame for everything. And right now, our country has the same problems. We're just one election away from having a government exactly like they've got in the UK. We're in Canada. See, we're all the same here. We're all in the same boat. We've all been subverted. Communist ideas and left-wing ideas have come in. We've had open border. This is a struggle internally in every Western country. Let's not alienate those who share the same problems with us. That would be my message.
Jeff, thank you. Brian, that sounds like perhaps some of your comments prompted some of Jeff's. Would you like to respond?
Yeah, Frank. Look, I think in general, Jeff is right at the level of, you don't want to alienate people who can be friends of yours. And so these are just judgments that need to get made. Are the Canadians today an enemy of the United States? Well, it would seem hard to believe that entirely, right? We don't want them to be enemies of the United States. We would like to win them back to the side of the West. But if they're going to take steps, I guess I'd ask Jeff, what would it take for him if the Chinese were on Canadian soil and the Chinese put a base on Canadian soil? Would that prompt him to think differently about this? I don't think we're far away from that.
Yeah, could I just ask, Jeff, I wanted you to just develop, and I think you could do it in response to this question too, your insights into this Sidewinder report of a number of years ago and what it said about Chinese penetration.
It's a very serious report. It was 1997, and it said something has to be done right away, and instead they covered it up, and then the problem got worse. So it was already bad in 1997, and it's bad here, by the way, and it's bad in Mexico. It's bad in the whole Western Hemisphere. It's a serious problem. But in terms of defending, look, if Chinese troops landed in Canada, I would invoke the Monroe Doctrine, and I would ask for a declaration of war on China and Canada if they allowed it. Now, I would seek Canada to be an ally of the United States to repel a Chinese invasion of the North America. But, it's a hypothetical scenario. But obviously, we cannot allow Chinese armed forces to establish themselves in North America. Absolutely not, because China's strategic goal is to fight World War III in North America, not in Asia or Europe.
Which, of course, brings to mind the sizable deployment of Chinese soldiers that have been apparently more or less covertly, but fairly openly, for that matter, across the open border during the Biden administration, making, I think, that scenario, Jeff, of war in North America that much more likely. Ken Abramowitz, I guess last call to you. We're a little bit over time, but I did want to make sure we had your thoughts on both our preparedness to contend with the kinds of challenges that we've been talking about in the course of the program in Canada and the Arctic beyond, but also how you would manage the difficult business of diplomacy when so much is on the line.
Sure, thank you very much. So I didn't say that Canada, England and France are enemies, they're pre-enemies. And so, yes, we want to use non-kinetic means to move them away from becoming enemies, because if they become enemies in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, we're actually going to have to invade Canada, England, and France, as difficult as that to believe. If the Muslims take over England and France and point their nukes at America, we're just we're not gonna do something. And if Canada gets taken over by China and the Muslims, and bad things will happen. So I monitor 7 forms of warfare, and I'm a big fan of using non-kinetic means before the kinetic means, because I've learned from the Chinese. So where, for example, we're fighting a cultural war, a war of words, economic war, legal war, demographic war, and cyber war. So I much prefer using those forms of war to induce regime change or consensus change in those countries, because if we don't, then we're stuck with kinetic war, which none of us are fans of using kinetic war first. And I must say we've learned from our friends in China, this is basically their plan. So I'm just saying we have to use their plans rational. We have to use that in reverse. One thing I would like to do, and in fact we should do it for ourselves first, is I would like to have a survey of high school history books in Canada, England, France. I'd also like to do it in America to see what nonsense our teachers who went to teachers' colleges are teaching our kids, because that's a precursor for future wars, because we're fighting a cultural war right now. So I would say that would be very useful for the government to just have a bunch of people read textbooks here and there and see what the future generations are being taught, because that'll, and let it out in the open so that the American people can see in horror what our teachers are teaching our kids and grandkids, and what Canadian, British, and French teachers are teaching their kids. I would say that's cultural warfare. I think that would be a good place to start.
Well, I do want to say on that note, a friend of mine, Julie Pickering, who is on the State Board of Education in Texas, has just helped engineer a massive rewrite of the textbooks used from kindergarten on up to 12th in that state school system. And because of the size of that market, I think Texas is one of the drivers of textbook content, one of two, California, I think, being the other one, God help us. But she's being pilloried, by the way, for having done that, among others, by the Council on American Islamic Relations, which, fortunately, the governor of Texas has had the vision to recognize as a terrorist organization and a transnational criminal organization, along with the Muslim Brotherhood. But that's another day's program. For the moment, I think we're going to wrap, Ken, with that observation. Thank you to each of the three of you who were able to join us in person: Brian Kennedy, of course, Jeff Nyquist, and Ken Abramowitz, in addition to those who joined us by video, Rod Martin, Jim Fennell, Sam Faddis, and Grant Newsham. An extraordinarily important conversation, and as Brian observed, a very timely one indeed. I hope that you all have benefited from it and that you find it sufficiently compelling to pass along the link to your friends, neighbors, colleagues, and representatives, all those who have a need to know about the Chinese unrestricted warfare against America, the Chinese Communist parties, let me hasten to add, and the new front that they are opening in the Great North. We will be following this closely. I hope you will be following us as we do. In the meantime, thank you all. God bless you, and God bless our country.